And this introductory music. Thanks, everybody. That's my theme song. That comes on every time I get up to speak. That happens. It's really great. Thank you. And thanks for being here. I think all of you should win extra reader points for coming out in a monsoon and being so kind and welcoming, and some coming very far from where they live and some coming right down the street, and this is great. And I also, just in case no one showed up, I brought my own people. So I want you, if you don't already know Susan Pecora, you might know her artwork. You might have seen her on Channel 57, watercolor, Reflections Through Watercolor.
There you go.
Yeah, her television.
About me, it's about.
Wow, introduced and wandering around somewhere, and there she comes.
There she is.
Here she comes right on time. And she was just behind here is Suzanne Strempek, who is head of the board of directors of the Billy's Malawi USA, which is the American fundraising arm of the Billy Reardon Memorial Clinic. She lives in West Springfield, but is really just right off the plane, about a week ago?
Probably
from
2 weeks
two
ago.
weeks
Yeah,
ago, all right.
Yeah.
From Malawi.
On Tuesday. I came home on a Tuesday night.
So here, happy anniversary, yeah. So yeah, and she's brought some new crafts. So if you have heard me talk about the books before, you might stop by here and just see the new treasures that she's brought back. And all the proceeds from the crafts here, which are made in the village where the clinic is set, it will go right to the clinic and a portion of This Is Paradise as well. And I also have books, because there are some holidays coming up, and even if yours has already gone by, it'll probably come around again next year, so you can be all prepared. And so yeah, and we have, actually this is an example of Susan's artwork. She made the sign coins for the clinic, so if your pockets are very cumbersome tonight, you can just, you can just leave your stuff there. So anyhow, thank you again for coming. I don't live right near here. Again, hence I brought my people. But I happen to have friends who've come tonight, and I'm really grateful. I live in Palmer, which is, I don't know, what did it take us? Like 45 minutes? Yeah. It was rainy, and everybody's going very slowly, which I was happy to say. So it's great to see you again. And Abby as well. Thank you. So yes, and that is where I do my writing, and that's where I grew up. I grew up in Three Rivers. Palmer has 4 little villages. I grew up in one, Three Rivers, which is known for 2 things. Across the street from my house is Pulaski Park, the polka capital of New England. Since the 1930s, it's had a polka show every Sunday afternoon. And 7 houses down from my house is now closed, but for many, many decades was the scene of the Tampax tampon factory. So that's what my town was known for, or my neck of the woods. And we're laughing, but Tampax employed a lot of people, and it doesn't do that anymore. My dad worked at Uniroyal since he was in his mid-teens, and until it went out of business in '81. I think he was there 37 years, and it was the kind of place where you would get a job and you'd have a job. And now the factory is in Three Rivers is sort of chopped up into a lot of different things. But that's where I grew up, and when I started writing fiction, they were great things to add and toss into my stories. So I didn't have a lack of material. I didn't have a lack of, oh, thank you, wow. So you can bring you water if you bring people. Thank you, Susan. So I basically looked out the window when I wanted to try to write fiction, and I started tossing in my Polish-American, Polish Catholic neighborhood. And it kind of all came easy for me. I had a bit of a reporting, writing background before I came to writing the fiction that got my books started off, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. I don't come from Shakespeare. I'm not sprung from Shakespeare. Again, my dad made tires. My only literary connection is that my mother drove the bookmobile in Palmer for about a year. We had a big, big truck. I don't know, do you have a bookmobile here? No? We had a giant truck, and, well, it was a closed truck, but big van. And my mother and Mrs. Bigda would ride around the villages and have certain stops, and I would ride along behind them with my bicycle because I couldn't ride on the thing, and I would get on it and they would let me stamp the little cards that went in the back of the books. It was very exciting, and maybe that's where I kind of soaked up some sort of a literary connection. I was always a reader. We were always encouraged to read. My sister and I were always reading, but it really wasn't till high school that I started writing regularly, and that was because my town paper in Palmer, the Palmer Journal, never wrote about the boys hockey team, and I loved the boys hockey team when I was in high school, and I loved some of the boys on the hockey team. So I decided that I would march down to the Palmer Journal when I was a sophomore in high school, and I would ask them why they weren't covering the team, and they said, we have no one to send, we're a small paper, why don't you write the stories if you go to these games? And so I went to games, I wrote the stories, and every Thursday they got in the paper, along with a picture I would take. The boys still never won. They were 0-30, I'm not making that up, because we're not a rich town, so they couldn't afford to rent ice time, so they would only practice if the water froze. So like, let's say, you know, it was a mild winter, they would just get killed. They would just get killed. It was just awful. So, but I still loved getting them in the paper. And I then realized that the newspaper that came out of Springfield that we got in my house every night then was the Daily News out of Springfield. I realized they weren't covering the team either. So I asked somebody at one of the games, I said, who's the reporter for the Springfield paper? And they pointed out this guy, and I went over and said, hey, you never write about the Palmer Panthers. And this fellow said he would, and I didn't trust him. So that night I went home, and on my manual Royal typewriter that I received for 8th grade graduation from my parents, I banged out a nasty letter to this guy saying everybody in Palmer was going to be watching, and he better write about the team. And lo and behold, he did. And we became friends, and I would sit up in the press box with him. He got my foot in the door at the Springfield newspapers, and when I was a sophomore in high school, I was photographing for the paper on the weekends. And when I went all the way to art school, which was my college experience, I went to study photography. Every summer or winter vacation, I would work in the sports department at the newspaper. And when I graduated, even though I had a degree in photography, I began to work as a reporter. And that was in 1980. But 10 years after I sent that nasty letter, it pays to complain because 10 years after I sent that letter, I married the guy I wrote to. So, and that's Tommy Shea. Some of you might have read him for many years in the Springfield newspapers. Yeah, he wrote for them for about 39 years, and right now is home writing a book on baseball. So hopefully he will come and visit you maybe in a couple of years and regale you with the stories about the best home runs in the whole history of the world. So I think it's about that. So we'll see. And he's doing a great job. I'm getting to read some of them so far, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm really excited, and I'm really proud of him. And so that's what we do, is we sit home and write. We have a long table that my dad made me, and we used to write with the printer in the middle. Now that it's winter, we've sort of moved our act into a sunnier room, and we're working at a smaller table, so the backs of our laptops just kind of clash up against each other, and he's working on his book and I'm working on my stuff, and it's wonderful. So I write fiction and I write nonfiction. My fiction, Tommy calls lying for a living, because I get to make things up, and it's great. And the nonfiction is not lying for a living. And not lying for a living is what I did for 15 years as a reporter. I wrote stories just as they were happening, and just what people were saying, and just what the circumstance was. And that is when I started writing fiction, because I was put on a night shift in 1989, and all of a sudden I said, well, what am I going to do till 2 in the afternoon? I'm used to going in at 7 in the morning. So I thought, well, you know, I'll work in the garden, or I'll work on my art that I like. And then I said, you know, I'm reading a lot of short stories. Maybe I'll try to write one, because they're short. So how hard could they be? You know, that was sort of kind of thinking, all right, I'm just going to throw a few of these and maybe 10 or 12 pages. It'll take me like a morning or something. So I would sit down before I went to work at the newspaper, and I would write until The Young and the Restless came on, which is 12:30. And it's a great kind of a break to your day. Plus, some of you might have heard me say this already, whatever is going on in your life, the people in Genoa City always have it worse, don't you know? Does anybody here watch? That's too bad. Susan used to watch. She's deserted me in The Young and the Restless world.
I was looking for Tommy pictures. I had a really good picture of you and Tommy together.
Aww. Yeah.
But here's Tommy if anybody wants to see Tommy.
So thank you. Oh, there he is. Yeah. So yeah. It's,
Okay, back to The Young and the Restless.
Back to The Young and the Restless, which is very important, because it's going to figure later in my story, actually. But that was sort of my break in my day. And then after The Young and the Restless, which was 1:30, I would get ready for work and go to work for 2 o'clock. And then I'd work till 10 o'clock. And I loved it. I loved being a reporter. I think it's a job that's also a public service. You tell your community what's going on. In my house, we're big fans of Pete Hamill. Does anybody here read Pete Hamill? Yeah, got a couple of fans. Yeah, you know, he could do fiction, he could do nonfiction. He was a journalist for a long time. He was an editor. He does criticism. He does it all, and he does it so well. And he once told a story that I heard, but I'm not sure if it's his own story, but I love the way he told it. And he said the writer, the reporter, the journalist, they're the person when we're all sitting around a fire and we're all surrounded by woods and there's a noise in the woods. The writer or the journalist is the person that runs out into the woods to find out what's causing the noise and comes back and tells the rest of us. So this is our job. This is what we do. Those of us who write is we go, in the case of someone who does news, goes to what's going on at the library meeting tonight, or what's going on at the selectmen meeting, or what's going on at that fire, or what's going on, where's that ambulance going, or what's happening over here with our taxes, what's happening in the good news and in the bad. In my case, I choose a topic and I might work a year or 2 or 3 years on it and come back and tell you what I've seen, whether it's all up here in some cases or whether it's halfway across the world. So I'm really loving doing this, and that really only started because I tried those few short stories. One got really long. I saw no end in sight. And you had mentioned Sound the Light of Heaven. That was the first book that you read. Thank you very much. That actually came out 20 years ago. So I'm now lucky enough to do this for 20 years. My first book came out in '94, and it was a book that I thought would be just one of those short stories about a lady who sold her engagement ring through the classified ads. I would always read classified ads as a reporter for ideas for stories, because you would see people selling weird things, hiring people to do things that were unusual. I once did a story on Millie's pierogi, which some of you know from Chicopee, and because they had an ad, pierogi pinchers wanted. And I was thinking, I gotta go there for the day. And what do they do but wear lab coats and hairnets, pinch pierogi while watching soap operas? So I said, this is fantastic. So that was fun. You know, different stories like that. I would look for story ideas there, and I would always see wedding apparel and jewelry and gems, and I would wonder what was the story behind somebody selling one of these things. My wedding ring is my babci, my mother's mom. This was from her wedding in 1915, and I wouldn't sell it, but other people had things that they would readily sell because they're not as dear to them. So I, as a reporter, would have called up one of those people with the ad and said, hey, you know, I'm calling from the Daily News and I'm doing a story on people who are selling their wedding stuff, and would you talk to me? But as a fiction writer, I just thought I'd invent somebody, and I went to town and it got really long, and again I saw no end in sight, and that was it. I had a book, and I had really kind help from Eleanor Lipman, if we have any Eleanor Lipman fans here. She is somebody who came out of the blue. Tommy had interviewed her at the time that I was working on that big long short story, and he talked to her about would she meet with us and maybe talk about how do you know when something's a book? Again, his dad, both his parents came from Ireland. His dad made tires with my dad, and his mom cleaned houses for rich people in Longmeadow. So he's not sprung from Shakespeare either. So we're, how do you know this could be a book? We don't know. And she was nice enough, and she had only met him twice while he was doing the story on her. But she said she would meet with us, and she then, without either of us offering, she said, "Oh, could I look at your story?" And she loved it so much that she sent it to her friend who was an agent and to her own editor, and they both accepted it when I was done. So those of you, do we have writers here? Do we have anybody who's, I know we have Bill's a writer.
I wouldn't necessarily call
I
myself
think you're a writer,
Bill.
Bill. Bill is actually a student in the program where I teach in Maine at the University of Southern Maine Stonecoast MFA program. It's a very fine nonfiction writer. So we have one. Do we have anybody else here? We've got, all right. You've got children? Yes, I used to sell them at Edwards, right, Barbara? So you know, it's the kind of thing of sitting down and doing the work every day. And I learned a lot about that. And I also learned that I was very lucky to have Eleanor's help early on, because sometimes you try for, how long did it take you to get an agent or an editor?
Well, I sold my first book after 5 years.
Yeah.
Then I got an agent, I think maybe 10 years.
Yeah. See, so I realized how lucky I am, because it just kind of fell out of the sky and hit me on the head, and I've been having a great time with it. So everything that I get to do in this whole book experience really is more icing on the cake, and including tonight, because I'm just really feeling grateful that I get to do this. And so that's what I do. I sit around in my bunny slippers, and when I'm done writing, Susan and I go for a dog and a horse walk, sometimes both, sometimes one or the other. And so over these 20 years, I have now 6 novels and 5 nonfiction books. And they are books and story ideas that have called to me for some reason or the other. At the program where Bill and I work, we have, actually he's going to be coming back, Lewis Robinson, I don't know if you know him, fiction writer, is going to be coming back to the faculty, and he's got a line that he uses. He says, write what you can't shut up about. And that's what I try to do, is I try to pick something that I can't shut up about and that I'm going to want to spend that year, or that 2 or that 3 years with. Because even though you can be in the most busy Starbucks with all these people milling around you and knocking into you, but you're still very alone when you're writing. It's just you and the paper, you and the screen, and you have to focus on that, and you have to get your work done. I try to do 2 pages a day, and one of my literary sheroes, which is Anne Lamott, she said if you can't do the 2 pages a day, you try to write the 2 paragraphs or the 2 lines or the 2 words. And for me, that's, if you can do that every day, that keeps that thread going. And also, it's to me, it's really an example of where do you want to spend your time, how much time do you want to put into your writing, what's important to you. And all the people who know that, oh, you're doing that now, I always wanted to write, they say, but you know, I never had time for that. But you know, we'll have time for what we want to make time for. It's pretty amazing when we look. Anne Lamott has a line in her book, Bird by Bird, where she says, give up the nightly news, which I don't recommend. I want everybody to be informed. But she's talking about the late one. So give up the 11 o'clock news, she says. It only serves to ruin the morning paper, is one thing. And you can use that half hour to do your writing. So, you know, if you can kind of move things around a little bit, say, what am I not going to do that I want to do this other thing? So that's sort of what I do, is I try to find the time every day and sit down and do it. And over the years, picked ideas that to me, called to me, that I really wanted to spend time with. The first one about the ring. The second one, I was very lucky with the first book that it just came really quickly to me. And being a reporter, I always have a little ratty notebook with me of story ideas, of book ideas, and I always had, as I was starting the books too, more and more ideas, thinking in case I do another one, and I did have another one. So when the first book did really well, surprisingly, that the publisher said, do you have another idea? And I said, well, I have an idea about a woman who starts a polka band, all female polka band, which I never did, but my dad wanted me to do, because I took 9 years of accordion lessons, and he said I could have made a killing at weddings if I was in this band. But when you're, you know, making stuff up, you can make somebody up. So that's what Hoop I Shoot by Donna is about, someone who starts a band. That means something to me because I love the music. The rural means something to me, where Susan and I walk our dogs and her horses is just a beautiful area. But, you know, being chipped away at by different kinds of developments and ugly houses here and there, shall we say. And so I wanted to write about a farm that was being sold in an area where a lot of development was happening, and the niece who must sell the farm for her ailing uncle. Not something I did, but something that means something to me. And it also, the Quabbin Reservoir figures in here too, which isn't far from my house, and I love that whole area, and I'm fascinated by the story behind how the reservoir was created, so I get to put that in there too. So there are things that mean something to me. Susan and I have a shared interest in art, so I wrote about an artist, Lily, who paints a family portrait. And again, this isn't something I do for a living, but it was fun to hang around with you while I was doing it and get some more ideas. So it's just that sort of a thing. I get an idea. All I need is a little, I call it a TV guide synopsis. You know, Suzanne comes to Southampton and can't believe what happens. That's all I need. I don't need an outline. So, but if you do an outline, if you use an outline, do you use an outline, Bill?
No.
No? Okay. All right. Barbara?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. Okay. Yeah, whatever works. You know?
Depends on what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think, and for me, I just never got into it. I just need that little bit that's going to excite me each day to keep going and keep going. So I got into nonfiction book length in the year 2000. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and for the first time, I kept a diary. I had a little diary when I was about 7, and it says things like, we went to church, you know, things like that. That's about it, you know. It snowed, we stayed home from school, and it had a lock on it because that stuff was really, really confidential. So, and I thought my sister would get it, but I never kept a journal. And when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, I was very freaked out. I was 41. There was no history in my family. I didn't, understand what was going on, and I started writing when I would come home from the Bay State, where I had my radiation therapy, thank you very much. And I decided I would write every day, and it really helped carry me through. I did not want to be driven to my appointments. I didn't want to be the kind of patient who was, I don't know what I thought of that, but I just said, I want to be tough. I want to be on my own doing this. So when I came home from the first day of treatments, Tommy said, "How did it go?" And he was sitting at our big long desk, and I said, "Wait a second." And I wrote for 30 minutes, and it really helped me. And I thought, well, if no one ever sees this, but then I thought, I'll show him, and I'll show the people who are being really nice to me, and then we'll have a bonfire. We did have a bonfire, if you remember, but the only thing we burned was I got these really giant bras from Goodwill, because for the theme, and then we're gonna burn those, and we're gonna burn the pages of my diary. And then Susan and Tommy and my other friends said maybe this could help somebody, because when I went to look in the Palmer Library, I went to look for books on radiation therapy, and I put radiation in, and I got books on Chernobyl and Hiroshima, and I was thinking, no, that's not really what I want. And I couldn't find a book that really spoke to that experience of medical radiation. And I think that's why some of us write what we write, is we can't find, or we paint what we paint.
Find what you're looking for.
Yeah, right, definitely, as Bono said. Still can't find what you're looking for. So one thing sometimes leads to the other. I was supposed to be writing a novel, and after I was done with the cancer, I was sort of moping around not writing a novel. And my friend Janet Edwards said to me, I'm looking for somebody to work in my store. And her store was a small family-run independent, run by 3 generations of women. And Tracy and John, you were great. You used to come to the store as well. Yeah, you were great customers downtown. And that store was all in all in a couple different locations for about 34 years before it closed in 2008. And I worked there for the last 7 years. I thought I'd go, just for a little bit, just to get out of the house. And I loved it. I loved seeing the importance of a bookstore to a community and what it could do for people. And that you'd come in the door and Janet would say, "Oh, I put this aside for you. And if you didn't like what she recommended, you could have your money back." And it was just a lovely, lovely place. So I wrote Shelf Life about my first year there. So again, things that I get an idea for that really mean something to me. After that, I was watching in 2005 the wake and the funeral of Pope John Paul II. Being Polish Catholic, he was a big guy in my cultural story. But by the time that he died, I wasn't as into my Catholicism, and I was watching this nonstop news coverage, as I want to do about anything, watching, and I said to Tommy, I wish I could feel like that again. I don't feel what those people are feeling. And Tommy said, you should write about that, which is great to have in your house. Should be great if even a recording. If you don't have somebody in your house that says that you might want to write, should be like a little buzzer that you can put, and it just said you should write about that, because I love, and I'll talk to you in a second about it. I can think of these books where I got to the point where I said, I've got this idea, and Tommy would say you should write about that, and I remember him saying, you should write about that. Well, what am I going to write about? Faith and this and that. And it started corralling the idea a little bit smaller. Well, maybe I'll look at other faiths, but maybe there's so many, maybe there's too many. So I decided I would look at Christianity other than Catholicism, and went back to the Palmer Library, where the wonderful Mary Burnett, the reference librarian, told me there was something like 25,000 types of Christianity. I said, it's kind of a lot. So I got a list of this country, and I think this country we have about 2,000 types. And I picked some, and I started going to a different church every Sunday for a year, nationwide. And it was on my own dime to start with till I got a contract. And my coup was going to Hawaii for $10 on my Southwest Air miles. So it happens. You can go kind of far and wide for $10. So that was Sundays in America. And after that, Tommy and I and Michelle Barker, if anybody reads her, she's an East Longmeadow author who has written 2 books already. Set in the 1840s. We did History of the Sisters of Providence. So we're sort of hopping around. The entire time I've got these other stories on the burner, and they are the 2 books that have just come out this year. Make a Wish But Not for Money is a story about a palm reader in a dead mall. Now, I mentioned the dead mall before we were talking, and you know it on Route 9 in Hadley. There was one mall built there when I was a kid. Then they built another mall right next to it, and it sucked the life out of the other one, and this went on. And but people called it the Dead Mall. They'd say, oh, I live past the Dead Mall. I was in Florida a couple weeks ago with the books, and someone was at a talk. I used to live near the Dead Mall. She was all excited, you know. So the Dead Mall is a thing, unfortunately, in our culture that, you know, they built these mammoth buildings, and in time they're empty. And so I had an idea to write about a palm reader because in the early 90s, I was in New York City where Tommy and I loved to walk around, and I saw a sign that said palm readings $10. And I thought, well, what can you get in New York City for $10? That's legal. And so I went in, I gave the $10, and the woman took my hand and she said, make a wish, but not for money. And I thought that was so great. And I had a notebook that I was going to write in all the other important stuff that she was going to tell me about my life and that night's lottery numbers and everything. And I didn't write it down. All I wrote down was make a wish, but not for money. And I always had that in my little list of things I wanted to write about. I'm not a palm reader. I took out some books and bought some books about palm reading while I was writing this book. I was in the CVS in line for prescription reading one of the books, and somebody threw their hand on top of the book and said, tell me how long am I going to live? And so I can't answer that for you tonight. I will predict that you will read amazing books if you come up here later on. But beyond that, I can't help you out. But surprisingly, I've written about somebody who doesn't know about it either. So she takes on a job because she is out of work. She's been a teller, although in a bank, for 27 years. She's just lost her job, and her friend, who has a palm reading stall in the Dead Mall, has just eloped and left her the keys and said, you've got to get out of what you're doing. And it's kind of like how Janet said, you know, maybe you need to get out of the house. And so there's little things I can incorporate, but I said, you know, this is what she needs to do. She needs to get out of her house. Plus, her friend says there's only a couple months left on the lease because the mall's going to close anyway, so don't worry about it. And she says you don't have to know anything. You just have to know how to read a poem. But you can make that up. So I'm going to read to you a little bit about the original palm reader. His name is Irene, and in this book I call her Irene, the Queen of the Unseen, because that's what she is. So I'm going to find her. I had a book that was really neatly marked with all the sections that I wanted to read, and somewhere along the way I sold it to somebody. So somebody has a really marked up copy. Yeah, I've got it. Somebody has a marked up copy, maybe it'll be worth something, I don't know. But so this is how our original palm reader got into the work that she does. This is Irene. The actual Irene, Queen of the Unseen, has no mysterious inborn gift. The spark for this career of forecasting was a regular, everyday stranger girl on a train, a girl walking from seat to seat one light-starved December Thursday afternoon 45 years ago, when Irene was a newly hired office worker in Boston, recently sprung from a 2-year secretarial college. She was reading the evening paper's Ann Landers column, in which a woman was asking if it was just she or would Ann as well think it strange that her new husband kept his late wife's ashes urn on the toilet tank. Irene liked to guess Ann's answers, which were usually that the writer should wake up and smell the coffee or seek counseling, sometimes both. She looked away from the page to decide the answer, and that was when she noticed the girl asking if she could take people's pulses. This girl was explaining that she was a nursing student, that the pulses were her homework, how by the end of the weekend she had to fill 2 entire sheets of loose leaf, front and back, with data collected from that many wrists. She repeated that explanation to each rider in the car. Most compiled politely, extending their arms, maybe pulling up their sleeves a bit, or if they didn't, allowing the girl to gently do that for them. She crouched in the aisle as she found the correct spot on the wrists, fixed her fingers there, and stared at her Timex's second hand as she did her counting, beats against seconds. In this manner, she took the pulses of countless old ladies, businessmen, children. And most interesting to Irene, this girl took the pulses of 6 not bad-looking college boys seated in 3 consecutive rows. "You're fine," the future lifesaver told the first boy when she concluded her counting and handed his wrist back. "You're more than fine," she assured his seatmate in what was clearly more was more than a medical assessment. This appealed to Irene, not the future in medicine in helping people and maybe saving a life. What she liked was the idea of having a valid excuse to automatically get in close and take the hand of her pick of men in 3 consecutive rows, or anywhere. Irene was 20 and currently lonely and available, and crafty when she wanted to be, plus was ever hopeful for romance. She put her own thumb to her wrist and felt the beat quicken from all that possibility. So that's a little bit about her. And the book isn't about her. She's really just the springboard that the main character, Rosie Pilch, takes her job, and then things happen to Rosie, to the mall. And it was kind of fun to have the story going on about the person sort of in the back of the story. And when we think about our own stories about things that have happened in our lives, we go, well, you know, that person wasn't the whole thing, but if she or he hadn't done that, gosh, sometimes if I hadn't been fired or hired or, you know, moved here or done that, this whole other thing wouldn't have happened. So I liked focusing on her for the bit that I did in the story. So I've been having fun going around with this book. Has been out since October 5th. And it's the second book I have out this year. For those of you who are from the Valley, you might recognize the image on the front. If you are a Michael Cohen fan, the fellow who makes the tiles, I believe he lives in Hatfield.
Hatfield or Amherst?
Google that. Yeah, and see, yes, my
Right
assistant.
now.
Yeah. But I was looking for a cover image. I have had 2 publishers. My novels are out from Pocket Books, which is a division of Simon and Schuster. My nonfiction up to this point has been from Beacon Press, which is behind, well, recently moved, but was for many, many years, 160-year-old publisher located behind our State House. But now I am with a smaller publisher for these 2 books, and they're actually letting me have a say in the cover, which you don't normally. It's sort of like you're having a child, but someone else gets to say what it looks like, which is kind of funny. So now I get to say what the kid looks like. And so I was thinking, what can this be? Did you find out?
Amherst Road, Pelham.
Thank you, Pelham. Thank you very
And
much.
who gave you that?
Who gave me that? You. See? Thank you. And I had that. I was making dinner one night thinking about a cover, and Susan and I had gone through several incarnations of what we were going to do.
She had me painting her hand, the name of the book on her hand.
Yeah. And we had a crystal ball. We were doing all kinds of
Yeah, I was drawing
yeah.
pictures.
She spent a lot of money on
But no,
eyeliner.
the
remember?
spoon rest I bought her. She called up, would you be offended if the spoon rest that you bought me for Christmas, if I used his stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm not bitter at all.
No, but thank you. Thank you, Mike Cohen. Yeah. So first I asked you if you'd be offended, and then when you said no, I asked him. I wrote him, and I got an email back almost instantly, and he said, I said, how much would it cost to use this image? And he said, just give me a book. So I thought that was very nice. He actually came to the first reading and was there, and I got to meet him. It was really cool. So so that's a little about the back of that, which is fitting because Pelham's not far from the
That's a local
law.
book.
Yeah, it is,
local
yeah.
artist.
So at the same time, so this really, I've had this idea since the early 90s, maybe 92. And the other book that came out, which was in April of this year, This is Paradise, I had this idea probably since 2004, and it was cooking for a while. And it did take me the last 3.5 years or so, up to last January probably, to write and research and edit and all. And so sometimes things take not as long. A book I don't have here tonight, which is a novel called Becoming Finola, is my shortest book, and that's, sold out apparently. That took me 9 months, which is kind of fitting, baby-wise. But this is the longest, the gestation book. It's 3.5 years, and it was a lot of talking to people and a lot of collecting information and a lot of amassing stacks of that I took a picture. I said, I'm going to show this to my students. I've got to show you a picture to Bill of a picture. Yeah, like just stacks of how many notepads and pictures and Xeroxes and all this and photo albums, because I like to print out the photos that I had from this experience. But the idea was, came to me because I like to listen. I like to eavesdrop very much. It's a known fact if I'm out with Tommy or Susan, that people behind me are the people I'm listening to. So Tommy or Susan eventually will say, okay, what did they say? Because they know that I'm listening. Because you probably got, if you're talking about your family information or you're talking about something that's just going on, and now that you're all on the phone, you're great to listen to because you're really loud too. So it makes it a lot easier. So the writers are always out there listening to you as you're going about talking about your stuff. And in 2004, I was working for the 4th time at the Big E in the Irish crafters section in the Young Building. And I was selling sweaters to my friend Ryan from Dingle. And a couple stalls down, there was a woman who had some of the lovely crafts you see here tonight and some photos of a little village in Africa. I hadn't made my way down there yet, but I kept hearing her telling the story of why she was there. People would come to her stall and say, oh, what's this about? She would say, I'm raising money for a clinic I founded in Africa in memory of my son who drowned there in 1999. And people, for the most part, they might say something. They might toss $1 in her version of the coins for the clinic jar, and they would walk away. I think most of us go to the Big E, we want to pet the llama. We want to have the fried dough. You know, we're not expecting to hear about a charity. And that's what she was doing, was talking about this organization that she had founded in this very, very small nation of 14 million people, but specifically in the village of 15,000, where her son Billy had drowned while he was on vacation for the 3rd time visiting this lovely village, Chembe village in Malawi. And she wanted to do something in his honor. He was 25 when he drowned there. He was the kind of a guy, he worked in the family hostel. He also worked on a boat in Dingle Harbor. And when he would amass enough money, he would call a friend who was like-minded, loved to travel, and he would say, hey, let's go to Thailand, or let's go to South America, or let's go to Canada, or let's go to Australia. And they would go, live on the cheap, and then come back and raise more money for the next trip. And that's what he loved to do. And so on his 3rd trip there, he went in to the water in Lake Malawi for on the very first night he was there, on the way back from a night out with his friends, and he drowned. And not really sure what happened to him. His mom thinks it might have been an aneurysm because there is a history in the family, but the fact remains that he died. And this was something that certainly tilted his mom's world, his whole family's world. His mom, Mags Reardon, who was the woman I overheard at the Big E telling the story, is somebody who's no stranger to tragedy. This is the 3rd child she had lost. She'd already lost a 4-month-old daughter to another drowning when the family car had gone off the pier in Dingle. She had gone to pick up her husband, who was a fisherman at the time, and the family car malfunctioned and went backwards off the pier, and she was able to get out, but the child was in a car seat in the back and could not get out. And a couple of years later, she lost another 4-month-old, this time a son, to crib death. And so you might think, how do you get out of bed after one loss, 1 child, and then 2 child, and then 3 children? And well, the 3rd child, Mags was older at the time. With the first 2 children, she still had other children to raise. She had 5 children in all, and still has 2 lovely daughters and now 4 grandchildren. But it was the kind of, I think when you look at her life, it was the time that if she was ever going to do anything else other outside her village, this was a sort of an opportune time to do it, because she could leave her family. She decided she would go and see the village where Billy had died, and in the year 2000 went to set a stone there in his honor, and began to see the beautiful people, the beautiful scenery, but also a lot of the challenges that people face there, be it famine or disease. The HIV/AIDS rate is about 35% in this particular village. But it's gorgeous, and the people are lovely. She fell in love with being there, began to visit as much as she could. She was a high school guidance counselor, so any school vacation she had, she would go. She would try to get extra time, spend there. She did a little bit of investigating into the schools, thinking maybe she would start a school in his honor. Schools there are more like crowd controls, just in some cases 1,000 kids sitting on the ground, maybe 2,500 kids for 8 or 10 teachers. And nobody's learning anything. So she is, she's thinking about that, and then she realized the median age is 37, so why should she do an effort to educate people when they're going to die so young anyhow? So Mags decided she might create a a clinic. And as she says, that's when she went back and told people her idea, and they kind of said, okay, she's gone off the deep end now, and what's happening here. But she said, no, I really want to do this. So she started raising money, and to date, 10 years down the line, since the clinic opened in 2004, the clinic has served 275,000 people in an area that before this had one doctor for 800,000 people. So when you go to make an appointment now, you're thinking, oh, I got to wait 2 weeks, whatever. And you're saying, no, here you probably never get to see a doctor. And even there is a small semblance of a hospital, maybe about 10 miles away outside this village. But there's rutted roads, they wash out certain times of the year. You have no transportation to get there anyhow. There are only 3 cars in this village of 15,000 people. And you have no money to hire one of the cars to get you out of there because there's about 98% unemployment. Mags hires 34 people to work in her clinic, 34 locals. She is the second largest employer in the village. So she's got that, and beyond that, the medical staff are doctors and nurses, at probably around 8 or 7 nurses at the time, and 2 or 3 doctors who come from all over the world, and they volunteer their time. They pay to stay there. They volunteer for periods of at least 4 months. Some of them have been there about 9 years now, and they really make the thing go. And the buck all stops with Mags, who raises the money, who hires, who fires, who tries to get grants, who tries to make the place more livable and better. And she spends about 8 months of her life there each year now. So I heard her telling certainly the start of that story, and I went home and I told Tommy Shea, I've got to write about this lady. And he agreed, you've got to write about her. And I said, that sounds like a magazine piece, don't you think? And he said no, which was discouraging to me. And then he goes, I think it's a book. And I agreed with him. And my next line was, well, I'd probably have to go to Africa if I write that book. And he agreed. So, and again, you use your air miles very judiciously, and you can get where you want to go. But I got to go there, and I followed Mags around Ireland, and I followed her around here when she comes to Western Mass. And I had a great time trying to tell this story through the eyes of people who knew Billy, who know Mags, through people who work at the clinic, who know the clinic, who avail themselves of the clinic, and people to whom this whole change in Billy's life and in Mags's family story matters. So it's a lot of people that I spoke with. It's a journey that takes you to Ireland, to Africa, to Western Mass. And I'll read just a little bit, and then I'll take any questions that you might have. I'm going to read a brief part that starts this off. Wait a minute. I'll read, because I know Suzanne was just there, and she's going to know what I'm talking about now.
I know what you're gonna read. I think I know.
Okay. It's a part about you. No.
No.
8,702 miles away in sub-Saharan Africa stands a stone. Depending on the day, Mags might pass it 8, 12, 26 times, starting first thing in the morning when she exits her one-room, second-floor flat, descends the 13 unpainted wooden stairs, and walks to the kitchen or the office or the carport of the lakefront volunteer complex that is her Malawian home. 3 yards to the right of the stairs landing, in a small raised garden, maybe 3 by 4 feet, and edged with clusters of low-growing pink flowers and a palm tree, is the stone Mags delivered here 2 days after the first anniversary of her son's death in the year 2000. 1.5 feet of gray stone from the West Kerry village of Inch protrudes from the soil, its top edge naturally ragged above the neatly carved words, this is paradise. That quote from the final communication from a son to his mother, and 2 dangling fuchsia shapes bookended by Celtic knots, hover above the inscription, remembering Billy Reardon, 1973 to 1999, Dingle, Ireland. A 2-foot path from the rocks edging the garden to the base of the stone is clear between the 2 plantings of greenery, but unless someone is weeding, you probably won't see anyone near. The image of Mags passing the monument with her usual fast-paced walk and without a glance at the memorial at first seems odd, until the viewer realizes it would be ridiculous for her to stop and reflect each time. Death is a fact of life for this woman, and the speed with which she flies about and passes the stone a dozen or 2 or 4 times a day hits home the fact that she is not here to mourn in the expected manner. But on the first visit Mags made to Cape Maclear, grief was still a raw-edged wound, and much time was given for pausing and reflecting. That was the point of the trip, made both to deliver the stone marking a young man's life and to heed the request he made the last time they were in contact. This is paradise, Mum. You have to come, you have to come, you have to come. So that's where I got this title, which is actually in a fax. They used to fax back and forth. It was sort of pre-email days. And that was the last fax that Billy sent his mom. You have to come here, you have to come here. So she did go a year later. She kept going back, and now she's there to stay, really. And I'm so glad to have told this story. And I've had a great time telling people about what one woman has done in this world. I think it's not a cliche that one person can change the world. She's certainly changing a corner of it. And I love how the discussion sometimes leads to, well, what can the rest of us do? You know, do we have to start a clinic? Do we have to move to another country? You know, sometimes we can buy a Stop and Shop card and give it to somebody who needs groceries. You know, sometimes we can visit somebody who's lonely. I mean, there's things we can do in this world. So I like how she gets us thinking about that. And I also like that I got to go around with her for 2 weeks. She was here in October into November, and she and I, and sometimes Susan and also Suzanne, went around and spoke to different groups, and she got to tell her story firsthand, which was very powerful. And she is coming back in March, I just found out, so we're looking forward to that. So yeah, that's, you know, it's basically, I overheard something. I overheard her telling her story, and I wanted to know more about it, and I've spent a lot of time finding it out, and I'm just really thrilled that these 2 books are out now. I do want to give Suzanne an opportunity just to say a few words, since you're right back from Malawi, and you did a great job. I think collecting a lot of new information for those of us who aren't there, and you are, other than me, you know, involved in the
eyewitnesses.
There we go. Yeah, we
Yeah.
got to see what she's up to. So you want to tell us a little bit about what you saw, and then
Well,
we
I
can take any questions.
I was stunned when I got off the plane and was on the road to the village, that how remote everything was, and that they were walking, and people were on the road walking, but there was nothing to walk to. There were sort of a mud hut here with a straw roof, and it was hot. It was really hot. The wind was hot, you know, and I got to the village, and then I just never saw such abject poverty. And then I never saw people okay about it, like they were really okay about it. And I think what struck me the most is when I would meet certain people there. There was a guy named Snoopy, and he had befriended one of the Irish volunteers and had gone back to Ireland and didn't like it. And he moved back to the village and he opened up a restaurant. And he served one night 25 people. And what he served them with, what he cooked with, was like this little kind of open thing that you cook on a hibachi with coal. And he was able to, they're so resourceful. And Max had me go back into the kitchen to look at his kitchen, which was kind of a joke to even say it's a kitchen. But he said, oh, what she, and I didn't, no one elicited this. She said, she is a savior. She has saved the village. She saved me. And that wasn't the first time I heard it. I ran into another couple they were from South Africa, who had been in the village 10 years prior and were coming back now because they had made donations. And they had donated to her and also to the Chembe Water Project. And they wanted to see what was going on because the Chembe Water Project also now had a garden, which we couldn't find. And they said that the improvement that they saw in the people's health over the last 10 years was remarkable. So we didn't ask them either. So people just kept saying, I'd run into other villages about how wonderful, you know, that not only was it their health that was being improved, but the village itself. And we never did find the garden of the Chembe village, of the Chembe Water Project, which Mags often talks about, how a project in Africa may not last 5 years, a nonprofit, and hers has lasted 10. And that because I was always doing this on faith, you know, I knew her, I trusted her, but I didn't, you know, you don't know, you kind of know somebody sometime, but now I got to see it firsthand, which rejuvenated me to do it. but just different things. I go to Costco's now and I go, what are you doing? You know, I noticed that, and everybody has a lot of money here and we're really grouchy. I'm grouchy. I have road rage. You couldn't even have walking rage in the village, you know. I thought you were going to talk about the sand, because it's not dirty because they're dirty, it's dirty because it's so dry and it's so hot. And then I came back and I thought, it really didn't have a lot of pollution. There's straw, because blows off houses all the time, and the mud huts, it will rain and the mud huts will melt. So they're like doozers, Fraggle Rock? They're like always building something. They're always rebuilding a fence or a roof or something. And there's plastic bags, like we had talked about. There's a lot of plastic bags everywhere, but there's no trash. And I realized they're so poor that they don't even have trash. If the man who makes the paper has to search for the paper to get it. And the clinic, the neat thing about this paper is the clinic donates the boxes from the pills. And he has this, I thought when I used to sell this at the Big E, that he had a little factory, it was the Paper for Project for people, I think it's what it's called, and the People for Paper Project or something. And I went into his little hut and into his yard, and it's this thing that looks like a catastrophe, really, but they're able to produce this paper with just really basic rudimentary items. And then I went in to see Shakespeare into his house, who I had seen and talked about, who I had talked about forever, and I sat down, his new wife, because his first wife was treated at the AIDS clinic and she died. So now he has another wife, who I met him the day before, carrying a chicken alive for his wedding the next day. So, and having just married a daughter, I was thinking, I would really have liked to have done this. This is really easy way to have a wedding. A chicken, and you walk down the road.
There you go.
It's done, But she brought out her best mat for me to sit on. And all the flies were around, and I was pretending they weren't around, and I was pretending I wasn't smelling a lot of fish. But he showed me how he made the paper and how he cut it and folded it, and not one bit of waste. They don't waste anything. We cut and we waste stuff, and he showed me how he put it all together. And he came and brought the products to me after I bought them, and he looked at me afterwards, and he said, if you hadn't have bought this and I didn't get this money, I wouldn't have had any money to buy seed so that I could plant to have maize to eat and feed my family. So he wasn't going to go out and buy socks. He was going to try to survive, because 95% of them are subsistence farmers. So that was sort of and I thought I wouldn't go back because it's hot and it's dirty, and now I really want to go back.
I know you do miss it. Yeah. Thank you. Just a little, I'm so thrilled that you went. So that's, and if you have a question for Suzanne or for me, why don't we just end with some questions, and then we'll be hanging around here if you'd like to chat with us some more. Yes, hi.
First of all, I really enjoyed the book. I know Suzanne, and so when she started to talk about Matt, she used to come in. And so your book kind of tied this in, because I had a strain about it, but I didn't really understand it totally.
Right, yeah.
And so your book really brought it all together.
Oh, thank you.
It brought life and whatnot. But I'm curious, if Max gets hit by a truck tomorrow, do you think the clinic is going to survive?
It's funny you use that expression, because someone, when we were on our little tour together, someone said, what happens if you're not there? Because it is basically, it's Mags, it's Steve Free, it's Elaine. These are two ex-nurses who were the project managers, assistant project managers, and they've been there. Steve's probably been there about 5 or 6 years now, and Elaine probably as much. It's those three, but Max does most of this, and she gets no government funding from Ireland or Malawi. Malawi has no social services. It's all basically people who are reaching into their pockets, and it's amazing. So if she's not there, and someone said, what if you're not there? And she said, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, she said, I might have a niece or nephew who'd step in, but she said, I can't be sure, so it's the kind of thing. That's why she was okay with me writing the book. If you've had contact with her, she's a humble person. She doesn't. Yeah, if you met her, she doesn't say, "Oh, hi, do you know I did this great thing?" That Bono guy's nothing. It's like I do this, no, she's very, you wouldn't know about it if you didn't get her talking about it. But the reason that she was okay with this project is because she's thinking it will let people know about it. Perhaps they will donate, and that will let the clinic live on past any life that I'm going to have. She's about 64 now. And
She doesn't tell me.
Yeah, right. I know, and she didn't, yeah.
So she's not training any Malawi.
Well, she would like to. There are a couple of the 34 who are hired who've been sent to be, let's say, lab techs or nursing assistants. But Malawi has 120 Malawian doctors for
And
14
all
million
Malawi.
people. Yeah. And the rest are national, others come in. And so they're really depending on people to come there. There's no money to hire anybody. If you go to school there to be a medical professional, there's not a job that's going to pay your bills. You go elsewhere. Like she says, there's more Malawian doctors and nurses in the UK than there are in Malawi. So it's she would like that. She says it won't be in my lifetime that they will take over, but she wants that. She doesn't want to be the white person swooping in and saving everybody. She wants to give this over to them. So yeah, thank you. That's hi.
How did you end up with the Big E?
There are many Irish Americans in this area who have their roots in the Dingle Peninsula, which is in the southwest of Ireland. That's where my husband's parents come from, and his sister lives there. And there are many people who have roots there or who had long ago roots and go back. And so in the year 2000, a group was asked to come over. And that group got larger and smaller depending on the year. And there might be 7 or 8 people who come over with, let's say, crystal, jewelry. Our friend brings the sweaters, there's music, there's different things. And they just have a little Irish village that they set up. And one year she just said, hey, would you like to come? Your clinic is opening. Would you like to come and raise money for it? So she included Mags that one year because Mags lived down the road from her. So yeah, it just happened. And she really, and so you look at the linchpins of this for me, if Fran hadn't asked her. And then in the year 2000, when they were just starting to come over, my friend Mary Ellen Lowney, who some of you might have read, she worked for many years for the Springfield newspapers. She called me up and she said, I have my friend's crafts from Ireland. She was supposed to sell them at the Big E, but because of 9/11, she cannot come over. So she said, they're stuck. Can you come and sell with me? We didn't even know how much the things were. We just went into the building and we put the stuff out. We said, okay, $11, $60, we just figured she might never come here. And she's paid to have this stuff come over here, and we couldn't get in touch with them to get any kind of a price list. Finally, Fran came over maybe 5 days late and took over, and all was well after that. But if she hadn't asked me, I wouldn't have met Fran. I wouldn't have been working then. Fran asked me back, or I would have never met Mags. So it's kind of funny when we look at the parts people play in our stories. So, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, hi.
Can we go back in time? And can you tell me how you decided to put Selling the Light Up Head in Chicopee with the landmarks and, the cultural aspect of living in Chicopee, and you did not grow up there?
No, I didn't. No, my dad was from there, and I loved my dad. And it was, he was still alive when I was writing that story, although he passed away suddenly before the book came out. But I thought, because I don't have kids, I like using my maiden name, and I like using things that are rooted in my dad's part of the story too, and my mom's part as well. And it to me, it's like using part of my story, and in books, they'll be hanging around a little bit longer than me, hopefully, in some form, maybe now in e-form. But I like that. I like using the local. And Chicopee was a big part. We probably ran into each other in the fruit fair when I was a kid, because we would go every Saturday to my Babci Strempek's on Canterbury Avenue. And then we'd go to the fruit fair, we'd go around town, and my dad, when he worked at the Fisk/Unira, we had a Christmas party for the little kids every Christmas, and I always tell Tommy that I probably elbowed him out of the way on the way to the toy table because his dad worked there too, So, you don't know who you met along the way, but I love those memories, and I love using that and other parts of, the local that I'm close to and that matters to me. So it matters to me, so I put it in there. Yeah, it's very easy.
My aunt worked probably worked with your father.
Probably, yeah, no, and it's the kind of thing and they work there all their life, really, Yeah, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
The fact that you're writing these books, okay, so you have this gestation period and you give birth to the book and now you move on in your life, but This is Paradise appears to have captured a lot more. You're right, you don't seem to be moving beyond it as a
Can't
book.
leave this child.
So do you feel as if you're ever going to have it in your past, or will This is Paradise be constantly in your present?
Well, it's different from, because all these others, either I made them up, or there's something that happened to me, or there were 150 years of the sisters. You know, this is the first book that I've done that is about somebody else that has this. Certainly the nuns, I mean the Sisters of Providence are just amazing, the things that they've established in this world and this community. But I've just really fallen for Mags' story and what she's, I mean the power of this one person and what that represents, I think, for the rest of us and inspires the rest of us. So I haven't minded at all taking the time that I have to try to get this book out there, which is really what I do anyhow. If a book comes out let's say, usually if my books have come out in the spring, I will go through the rest of the year doing as much as I can with a book. And it's kind of doubled with the new book coming out too. In the first year, my first book came out in May of '94. By Christmas, I had done 200 events. So I kind of got into this really. I just wasn't sure I'd ever do it again. So I just said, you know, okay, I can be at your breakfast, I can be at your lunch, you know, and I'll talk at your dinner, and then I have to go work at the paper, you know. So it's the kind of thing where I normally do a lot of this, but I just feel I'm going to see how much more I can do for her by, you know, when she comes back, we'll do other talks and things like that. And it's exciting to see how it reaches people and what it makes them think about and do. And so, yeah.
Begs the question, is there another book?
There always is. And speaking of soap operas, and I'll close with this, is that I and my friend Elizabeth Searle, who you know, she's a novelist out and an essayist near Boston. We love soap operas. We both love The Young and the Restless. And we have asked writers who have soap opera fixations to write essays about their soap opera fixations. So we have an anthology that is pretty much done, that we're about to get a publisher for. So it's called something like As the World Turns to the Guiding Light of Our something. We've put all these things. And so there's that, and then I'm also finishing. Susan has had several large hairy male dogs in her existence. And she went on Pet Finder, which is a great place to find dogs of any size. And I said, what are you doing on Pet Finder? She said, all I want is a large hairy male. And all I had to do was hear that. And I go, large hairy male, okay, I have to, you know. And then we were in the, in Belchertown in that breakfast place. And I said, oh, I'm working on this book called Large Hairy Male. And the waiter said, honey, that's what we all want. So I'm hoping that this is a novel about a dog adoption. So I'm about halfway through with that. So yeah, there's always something else cooking, yeah.
Just one more question.
Sure.
Just made me think of it. You've written so many books. Do your previous books, do they still resonate in you, or you just kind of park them because, you know, I've done that, and do you still think about them and go back and obviously you know your own stories, but do you, I don't know, reflect on them, or do they just sit in the...
No, I kind of can't believe they happened. So, you know, I have, my lucky number is 7, so I keep 7 of the first edition of each book. And I have them in this room that I pass through each day. And I will look up there and go like, oh my gosh, you know, it's just, I still can't believe it, because I really thought I'd be a reporter forever and ever, which I loved. But that this has happened, and the things that have happened because of it, and a lot of them have been really magical, and the people they brought into my life, and, you know, including up till tonight even. So, yeah, I don't take it for granted, and it's, I don't know, I just figure maybe the large hairy male won't be wanted, or maybe the soap operas won't. So if it ended here, it would all be the best thing ever that has happened to me. So, you know, besides people. But, you know, just the experience. So it's been a blast, so yeah.
What I think about This is Paradise is that, you tell the story, and you bring the heart of the story out, because lots of people write about people finding clinics and, you know, donating money, and, you know, you got the Melinda Gates, you know, foundations, but you've given them a real heart, and the story the way you tell everyone's story in the book, I think is what I really loved about the book. and makes what I think is a really great book because of that.
Thank you.
That ability to get that across. It just wasn't a story about Atlantic. It was a story about humankind and coming together and believing in doing something. So I really thank you for writing the book. It's really a wonderful book.
It's really kind of you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. My goodness. Wow.
Well, that's what good writers are about. I mean, they take you in a place where you couldn't go, but you go there and you can appreciate that someone else can bring you into that story and be a part of it. And that's one of the things about that book.
Well, thank you.
Well, how about if we?
Yes, yeah, gosh.
Look at the.
Before somebody says something bad. Cut it off there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.